Well, that's it. After a long, arduous journey, Multiversus is finally being laid to rest. For those who are unaware, Multiversus is a 2011 Cartoon Network crossover flash game starring characters from beloved TV shows such as the Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, and... What? What do you mean this isn't a flash game? Look at it. Next you're gonna tell me that it was released like 2 years ago. Well yeah, of course it didn't. Don't you see this? My apologies, I appear to have gotten my notes scrambled. Wait, the beta released in 2022? You're talking about like a mobile version, right? This is for consoles? So when did the full game come out? 2024? What does the full game look like?
Oh my goodness!
Okay, so apparently Multiversus is a 2024 Warner Brothers crossover game released for PC and console, citation needed, that will be shutting down May 2025. Multiversus first hit the scene in July of 2022. And while starting strong, it quickly fizzled out and was shut down in 2023 to the confusion of many players. Unbeknownst to the community, they were apparently playing a beta. Which, come on guys, the lack of any conspicuous designation on the title screen and individual in-game purchases worth over $100 should have given it away. You should have known that the 2022 version was only a beta, because as we all know, it's standard practice to put full version under a game's title to denote the full release. Just like it's standard practice to put a 1 on the first entry of a game series, like Mortal Kombat and Bomberman. For legal reasons, I'm unable to use certain words when describing this computer entertainment software that's apparently licensed out to and collects money from users that shuts down a year later, despite having in-game items that cost hundreds of dollars with characters and items that would take longer to unlock than the amount of time the game was available for, but with a final roster that matches the total of a game released in 2008 that had an adventure mode with full cinematics, 41 stages, and even a custom stage creator. I gotta say, Eddie, despite your absence from the roster, we know without a doubt that you've been here in spirit, and I'm glad you and your brother managed to settle your differences. I also never knew that your last name was Warner. A part of me feels like I'm also liable for referring to this game's roster as playable characters, because to use such an adjective to describe this collection of characters and LeBron James would inaccurately represent the experience that the average user had with them, simply viewing. Many opt to blame the players who decided to spend money on the game, which, considering Warner Brothers' behavior, makes perfect sense. They've demonstrated a pattern of mismanaging and canceling projects, as well as closing studios with seemingly reckless abandon. But only those who closely follow the industry, or at least the Warner Brothers company, would even know this. Because what Warner Brothers has effectively done is open a company that offered millions of players a milk subscription service, milk whose expiration date was revealed after the purchase was made. I think it's time to crunch some numbers. In 2022, the Multiversus beta released on the 26th of July, closing June 25th of the following year, meaning the beta was available for 334 days. The full game released on the 28th of May 2024 and ended on May 30th of the following year, giving us 368 days, meaning Multiversus was available to the public for 702 days, or approximately 1.92 years. Do you think anyone would spend hundreds of dollars on this greedy, unfinished mess if they knew it was only going to have support for less than 2 years? Not to mention the massive year-long gap in between those 2 years, and at the time of this video, no changes have been made to WB's refund policy, a policy which I'm sure they'll have no problem adjusting mere weeks or even days before their shutdown, just so they can legally say they offer players refunds. If you ask me, given the publisher behind it, Multiversus is even more egregious than the day before situation, which is a whole other rabbit hole. But all you need to know is that the trailers promised a ton of features and the final release failed to live up to any expectations, including the game genre being wrong. It was marketed as an MMO survival game, but the game that released was a survival horror game. Apparently, the game was so bad that Steam allowed every player who purchased it to get a refund, even if they were outside the refund window. And when that wasn't enough, they just automatically issued a refund to every single user who purchased the game. Unfortunately, Steam is unable to offer refunds for Multiversus because they've already given their payouts to Warner Brothers, but there should definitely be some special rules in place for a game like Multiversus, which spent the majority of its existence being non-existent, and the strange approach to the game's closure conveniently sidestepped Steam's return policy, and the cynic in me feels like that was intentional. Making the game a free-to-play live service with a $100 Founders Pack instead of selling the game at $60 feels like a way to compensate for the losses incurred by making the game free, and promising that the game will come back after closing it would minimize the amount of players who would try to refund their purchases. This has given Warner Brothers the likely unintentional, yet ever advantageous side effect of dividing the community, some of which who claim that those who feel like they got scammed deserve it. The shutdown also artificially inflates the amount of time the game was available for. When you see people asking for a refund for a game purchased in 2022 that they spent hundreds of hours on, they'll look ridiculous. But that's only in a vacuum. If you consider the circumstances around the purchase, the nature of fighting games as a genre, which tend to be very time consuming, the game's reward system, and also what the game had appeared to be promising, their complaints will start to make a lot more sense. So how do we fix this? My first thought is if a publisher is valued at or above a certain amount of money, say $4 billion, and decides to release a live service game or entertainment software that's licensed to consumers which is capable of collecting money and or colloquial term for currency which is used in exchange for goods and services from its users that relies on a persistent internet connection and updates to deliver the entertainment experience, then they need a legally binding agreement which requires the publisher of said entertainment software to maintain its servers for a minimum amount of time, or the publisher has to refund every user that invested any amount of money into the entertainment software that's licensed to consumers which is capable of collecting money and or colloquial term for currency which is used in exchange for goods and services from its users which relies on a persistent internet connection and updates to deliver the entertainment experience while accounting for inflation. But while legislation will help to keep the greediest of companies in check, I don't think everyone should have this law enforced on them just because of a few bad actors. This wasn't a problem before because at one point, big companies like Warner Brothers didn't release products like this as it would harm their reputation. But with the way live services have been dropping debt left and right, and the nightmare appears to finally be over, I think legal enforcements on live services aren't the way to go because by the time they're enforceable, it would really only prove to harm smaller businesses who would benefit from the lack of live service regulation. The most effective solution at this point would definitely be digital storefront policies. Editor's note, I just found out about Valve's new policy on season passes after this script was recorded, and basically Valve is going to hold developers at least somewhat accountable for failing to deliver promised updates. That being said, the suggestions I made in my original script actually supplement the measures that Valve has put in place, and if both systems are combined, I can see it fixing both the clutter and uncertainty factors that plague digital storefronts. Alright, back to the video. Blaming the customer or expecting accountability from the offending company are both tired solutions, so here's mine. Live services have been around for a while, and while they vary in genre and scope, I think many of them share enough similarities to where we can distinguish them from traditional games, akin to how mobile games and arcade games have their own category in the medium separate from console gaming. I'd even go so far as to give flash games and handheld games like those on the Game Boy or DS their own category as well. And I'm bringing up these other types of games so that I can make it clear that mobile games or live service games aren't inherently bad, but to illustrate that you have a general idea of where your expectation should be if you're playing a game from any of the aforementioned mediums. Simply put, live services need their own section in storefronts. But how would we categorize a live service game? I don't think there's really a general consensus about what live services are. I see a lot of people categorizing them as a game that has a constant influx of updates, DLC, battle passes, season passes, and all that stuff. But if we're trying to figure out which combination of those things should unequivocally denote a live service game, this isn't really going to get us anywhere. But if we peel back the curtain of confusion that modern gaming, you know what? I'm not going to drag everyone into this. If we peel back the curtain of confusion that shareholders, CEOs, and scummy companies have made of in-game unlockables, a live service game is a game that requires a persistent online connection for its storefront and contains either of the following: purchasable consumable items, which also includes in-game currencies, a rotating storefront which has items that can be purchased for real money, and that's about it. Think about it. Outside of a few extremely rare cases, any game with an online storefront that contains either of those two things is a live service. But on the other hand, if a game simply has one-time purchase DLC for characters, costumes, or stages, then that game wouldn't be considered live service, even if the DLC is released over a period of time. Now, I know my definition sounds rather cynical because I'm classifying a game by its storefront instead of its content cycle and progression systems, but it's because I'm looking at this from a publisher standpoint. And from that perspective, it really does just come down to the decision to publish a game with features intentionally missing, drip feed those features to perpetuate a hype cycle, and implement a manipulative storefront to encourage recurrent user spending. Even if the users are rewarded at a reasonable rate, the temptation to spend is still there. I'd also like to add that the rotating storefront with the option to pay with real money is the most simple yet manipulative system ever put into a game. If you give players the option to spend money with the fear of missing out instilled in them, they're going to cough up the cash. Now, because I can't stand games which promote this type of behavior, implementing a live service section even solves the issue of a game that you enjoy suddenly forcing you to choose between grinding and opening your wallet to progress, or in my case, uninstalling. Most modern games only force you to grind because they want you to get frustrated and spend money. If there's no money to be earned from frustrating the players, then they'll just remove the grind. Don't just take my word for it. Look at a failed live service like Chocobo GP, which now showers you with the unlockables that would have taken you weeks to earn while it was still alive. Now, whether that grind would have taken place in game or at a job would have been up to you. In this day and age, a game having to state that it contains in-app purchases is far too vague. Not only does it allow greedy companies to flood their games with in-game purchases with minimal warning, but it also deters players like myself from even wanting to try the game because of the negative stigma that in-game shops have due to greedy companies who flood their games with in-game purchases with minimal warning. It's for this reason why a hard line needs to be drawn for what counts as a live service as opposed to a game that simply has DLC. Say a publisher decides to release a game with updates that will patch out bugs and add more features. It'd be unfair to consider that game a live service because the only revenue stream aside from the initial purchase are finite one-time purchases, which is totally fair if you ask me. This still means that games with absurd amounts of DLC will be placed in the same category as those without, but it will still force publishers to choose which category to put their game in. Do I label my DLC simulator as a live service and scare away customers who don't want to grind, or do I make all of it paid and alienate customers who aren't willing to spend? Either choice will expose the game's monetization systems and make it easier for users to decide which game they want to invest their time and or money in. Not to mention that as AI slop continues to infect digital storefronts, it'd be a good idea to experiment with filtering systems sooner rather than later. On every storefront, live services need not only a tag, but also a way to filter them out, because they really shouldn't be in among games which use an entirely different revenue structure. It's like if you search for a movie on Amazon and they showed results for both physical copies and streaming options on the same storefront. At least they have the decency to use Amazon Prime for that. And by keeping the definition so simple, you can ensure that even the sneakiest of devs have to classify their game correctly. On Steam, for instance, Valve could easily add a box that you have to tick if the game you're uploading contains real money transactions for consumable items / currency or rotating storefronts, which puts your game into the live service section. But if you don't tick the box, then the game just won't be able to function properly. This system also means that your little $5 indie project won't have to compete for shelf space against games with revenue streams that enable it to have advertising budgets greater than the combined income of everyone who both worked on and purchased the indie game. My overall thoughts on this situation is that while I believe policies should have been implemented back in 2022 when Multiversus first released, just like Valve's near instantaneous ban on all NFT games, the fact that some publishers like Warner Brothers are still trying to double down on live services means that these are policies worth enforcing. But what are your thoughts? Do you enjoy live service games? Aside from the obvious picks, which live service games execute the system exceptionally well and why? Do you think that separating live services from other games is a good idea? And what are your suggestions for how we can prevent another situation like the live service bubble? Let me know in the comments down below, and be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe to see the next post as soon as it goes live. Alright, take care.